purposes for why they continue to push these narratives and continue to keep people confused and confounded and fighting amongst one
And
another.
then we got to realize they have a certain motivation because they came over here during the Victorian era.
Right.
See, so they came over here during extreme poverty in Europe.
According to English Heritage, Victorian England, the Victorian era spans the 63 years of Queen Victoria's reign over Great Britain and Ireland from 1837 until her death in 1901.
1,000 people receive less than $60 per month per family, and a constant army of 8 million lives on the border of starvation. A committee of the London Country School Board makes this declaration. At times, when there is no special distress, 55,000 children in a state of hunger, which makes it useless to attempt to teach them, are in the schools of London alone. The emphasis is mine. When there is no special distress, means good times in England, for the people of England have come to look upon starvation and suffering, which they call distress, as part of the social order. Chronic starvation is looked upon as a matter of course. It is only when acute starvation makes its appearance on a large scale that they think something is unusual.
Do explain that to the listeners.
So in the Victorian area, what it was is they was living in workhouses.
Hello, subjects. Let's take you on a quick tour of the infamous Southall workhouse. That portrait you see there is of the Reverend John Beecher. He devised this workhouse system that would soon become the model throughout Victorian England. Essentially, it was an early form of welfare. You could be admitted to the workhouse, you would be given bed and board, such that it was, and in return you would work 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. Women would work in the wash house, the bakery, the kitchens, whereas the men would either pick oakum or work outside in the gardens. Families would be split apart on their entry. Essentially, they made it as hellish as possible so nobody would seek help.
They didn't have rights to land or anything like that in England. They couldn't own properties or any of that thing.
So if I may interrupt and interject a point that I believe you're making, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the very conditions that they forced upon the slaves is the very conditions that they themselves were suffering under from where they were before they came over here.
Correct. This is why I tell people
Wow.
you have to understand that the first time that they was free was when you was enslaved.
The Victorian workhouses were intended as a safety net for the poor, but in reality they were brutal institutions. Families were torn apart, with men, women and children all kept separate. Inside, the conditions were grim. The poor were forced into hard labor in exchange for food and shelter, but both were meager. People feared the workhouse so much that many preferred to starve on the streets. These institutions symbolized the harsh divide between the wealthy and the working class. If you think Victorian life was glamorous, think again.
Wow.
This is why they hold on to that so hard.
And that makes sense.
So when they was recruited to come over here, you have to understand that we was going through the Reconstruction period. We had thriving black communities, Pine Bluff, Arkansas, Wilmington, North Carolina, thriving. You do any research, thriving black communities.
And this is where they put the former slaves.
Blissville basically became the core for the early black commercial district. It was established really just west of what's where Mount Holly Cemetery is, right in close proximity to 9th Street. The 1870s and 1880s businesses were being established, especially from Broadway, which was kind of anchored the east end of the West 9th Street business district, all the way down to Ringo Street. And in that kind of 6-block area, majority were operated by African Americans. We had a new kind of type of African American living here, a black urban middle class.
You know, you're talking about people who understand very well that they have to be self-sufficient, that they have to be self-contained. We're also talking about people who are very intelligent. They understand well the times in which they live and the things that they need to do in order to survive.
So they came over here in extreme poverty. They was considered white trash by the majority of America.
They're on other
white people.
Other white people, basically.
You see?
Right.
So they came over here, and then the recruitment process of them bringing them from Europe didn't end until 1913. What happened in 1913? World War I started.
Right.
That's the only thing that slowed them up from recruiting these white people over here. Right?
Right.
So you have to understand that we was building massive amount of wealth.
Something new was happening in Arkansas in terms of just societal change.
The Republicans gained control, passed a new constitution, which meant that African Americans now, for the first time, African American males, of course, would be able to vote. Comes as a surprise to a lot of people, but there were 20 African Americans in the Arkansas legislature. 16 of them were in the House, and there were 4 senators. Of course, we've never had that many African Americans in the Arkansas legislature.
And they come over here, see us building wealth. They come from living during the Victoria era where they was living in workhouses. Their children was forced to work in factories.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So this is the conditions that they come from to come and see these people, because during slavery, we had so many skills, even in slavery. Places like Wilmington, North Carolina, had to have coordinates to ban slave hiring. Slaves walked around with numbers on their necks identifying their trade. We had skills.
Wow.
So we left slavery with these trades, these skills, but we came into slavery with it. I ain't gonna go into that. But
Right.
we left with these skills still they did not have, because you have to understand that who's going to pay this white person to do anything when you have slaves?
Especially when you have skill.
Virginia Humanity Encyclopedia. Hiring out of the enslaved. While less well known than other facets of institutional slavery, hiring out of the enslaved was a common and long-standing arrangement throughout the nearly 250-year existence of race-based slavery in Virginia. Enslaved commonly hired out enslaved individuals for a set fee and time period. This allowed enslavers the flexibility to allot enslaved labor to a wide variety of tasks, which contributed to slavery viability. It also fit with Virginia's increasingly diversified economy in the 18th and 19th century, being adaptable to rural and urban settings, as well as commercial and industrial sectors. All ranks of white society engaged in hiring enslaved people, including many who could not afford to purchase enslaved laborers.
So we have to understand that 1,400 white families owned land throughout the South throughout slavery. In Wilmington, North Carolina, in 1898, over 1,000 black families owned land only 30 years out of slavery.
Wow, and a lot of people don't know that.
See,
during this time, Wilmington's black businesses grew at a faster pace than any other North Carolina city. In 1897, over 1,000 African Americans owned some sort of property in Wilmington. The city's African American population was enriched by schools, wealth, and inherited status.
And also, when we're talking about people who may have been formerly enslaved, that doesn't mean everybody was in the field picking cotton. Some of these people had skills.
Bizarrely, this building was still in use in the 1990s.